And as you breathe out, welcome you into the space to open your eyes, to come back into this this space together, which we would like to have a beautiful conversation today together with our special guest, Jeffery, who's kindly joined us to talk about wholeness and restoring wholeness in our lives, in ourselves, in our society, and the systems that we have to deal with, to take on or to be part of. And so as we enter that conversation, I'd like to actually invite us all into a space of curiosity and in having a generative conversation to hold questions and curiosities to best understand or to understand what's possibly coming up in the conversation that you'd like to explore further into or that you don't understand. But also keeping in mind that we'd like to have a safe space so that we can hold critical or awkward or dangerous inquiries for another space. So yeah, invite you to contribute into that sense of safety. I'd just like to acknowledge before we get into the session that I'm joining you from Nyangabul country, which is the traditional lands which have been looked after by the custodians here for generations, and the contributions they still make to this land are deeply important. Sovereignty has never been ceded, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging here and across the lands on behalf of all of us. So welcome, special welcome to Al. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me. And I'll extend a special welcome to everyone else as well. Yeah, and I suppose for me, I'd just like to honor and note that I'm joining from Melbourne, the lands of the Kulin Nation, and also pay my respects to their elders, Wurundjeri people, for all of their wisdom and yeah, I suppose still incredibly animating and reminding ways of being with culture and country and consciousness. And so, yeah, I just like to really situate myself in this place. Yeah. I suppose I'm curious as well, just to hear where everyone else is joining.
Yeah, please, yeah. Everyone, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Takako. I'm calling in from Tokyo, Japan. I'm in a cafe, so it might be a little bit noisy around, but I was really looking forward to hear you saying and also share some of the epiphany that I had maybe later in the session. So thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
I'm joining from Ghana land, and it's great to be here with you all.
I'm calling in from Australia on the Gubbi Gubbi land. Can't wait to explore more with you guys.
Thanks, Eve. Now, Benny, where
to hear you, Tilly?
Oh, Tilly was trying to jump in. I don't think her mic's working.
Oh, okay.
I'll jump in. I'm calling in from beautiful Yugambeh country up on the Gold Coast. You can type it, Tilly, and then we'll share it.
Can feel your excitement though. It's great.
So let's get into a bit of a dialogue. We're going to spend a few minutes, 15, 20 minutes or so, having a dialogue between Al and I. And if you have any questions, please feel free to note them down or put them in the chat. And then we'll just have an open floor for dialogue between the group after that. Al is really beautiful soul who I've been connecting with recently and had some amazing discussions. It's been really lovely to get to know him, and really excited that you could join us on the session today for this digital campfire. Al has a lot of experience, which I'm only just starting to scratch the surface of, with a career starting at the age of 12, which is wild. And I'm sure that some of that story will weave into today's talk. And really, yeah, working as a designer, facilitator, author, podcaster, looking at the philosophical and practical sides of how we restore a sense of connection and a sense of wholeness in the things that we do, in the way that we lead, in the way that we are in community and in ourselves. So once again, thank you so much, Al. It's lovely to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's always beautiful to share such intimate space. I do a lot of sharing of large spaces with many people, and I actually find intimacy, for me, much more enlivening. Like to really cultivate a beautiful space together and really hear everyone's voices if we feel to share. So I'm very excited to dive into whatever we choose to swim in.
Well, intimacy might be a good place to start. You know, it's a curious idea as a place to step into the journey of creating wholeness in our lives. So it might be that, or it might be something else. Where would one start that journey?
Yeah. Well, I was reflecting today in response to one of your questions around my first experience of I suppose paradox, or maybe dualisms. And for me, it was in my first, romantic relationship, where in my desire to love the other, I would just totally throw my full self at them and lose myself. And so learned that a kind of intimacy for me, and I think Parker Palmer speaks to it, but the highest form of love is intimacy without the annihilation of difference. And so this dance between how much can I give of myself to another without losing myself, without dissolving a sense of difference into sameness. And I'm sure many of us may have experienced in relationships when difference is dissolved into sameness, things become a little bland. The eros, the passion, the desire, the polarity is dissolved. And so for me, that was one of my first experiences of the importance of maintaining a polarity, but the delicate dance between how do we honor difference, but in certain ways meet on a certain level where difference is celebrated, but we're also deeply connected to that which is actually essentially the same within us at the same time. And so I think that's, in a sense, for me, many things point to wholeness, because, for me, I could, and I'm curious to hear from everyone as well, but for me, restoring wholeness is really about restoring our connection to maybe spirit, or the invisible, or the ineffable, or the wordless, and bringing the invisible back into our lived flesh, body-based being in this world. And when we restore that connection, we start to kind of satiate that yearning, which I sensed, since a young age. There's a yearning for something beyond the physical, beyond what our culture has really prized, the visible. And much like if I'm hungry, I bite an apple and it satiates the hunger. It's very, it can be very difficult to satiate this kind of hunger for a much larger force, the force of nature, the force of whatever we choose to call it. So for me, restoring wholeness is very much about bringing that world into this world. And David White beautifully says that to be human is to become visible while carrying what is hidden as a gift to others. And for me, that really kind of sums it up. It's about welcoming the invisible aspects of self. And by self, I don't mean just this individuated identity we hold, but for me, self is a relational event. And so self encompasses the relationships, the milieu, the environment in which actually make self possible. And so it's about welcoming the invisible, the kind of mystery, the wordless wonder back into our fleshly lives.
Yeah, there's some really beautiful threads there of finding a sense of acceptance of all of our emotional lives, our the highs and the lows, accepting of our inner selves, our outer selves. And you mentioned paradoxes and polarities and the importance to maintain them and recognize them. Is that I suppose getting to know oneself in all of those myriad ways, how does that fit into the story of wholeness and the practice of finding wholeness?
Well, I suppose for me, wholeness itself is a kind of paradox. I think anything with language, the human mind does a great job at creating sides and then taking sides and protecting sides. And often, I see that we tend to take sides and forget, say, I pick up one end of the stick and you pick up the other end of the stick. We forget that actually it's the same stick. And so wholeness, I think something for me that's always a great reminder is that actually it's not a place that I need to get. It's not actually out there, that actually wholeness is all encompassing. And wholeness includes my brokenness, my fragmented self, my kind of poorly knitted sense of self. And it also includes our poorly knitted sense of a culture. Wholeness is accepting this. And that's the kind of paradoxical nature of change, in a similar way to a Chinese finger trap. For most people, the first time they try and pull their fingers out of a Chinese finger trap, they'll pull quickly in opposite directions. It tightens the trap. So paradoxically, when we turn towards acceptance, is a very liberating force. And so for me, wholeness is in itself is a kind of paradox, because it's not a place we get. And actually in trying to get there, we're othering who we are right now. And so it's a very humbling kind of journey of just how much of who I am right now can I actually live with and bear and behold with such affection and grace, which for me is a constant practice. Like it's such an easy tendency to work towards something out there. And if we are to live in integrity with our highest virtues, we practice those in the immediacy of every moment. And so it's kind of a courageous act to meet this moment and then this moment with as much grace as we can.
I love that, and what you say about the courage piece also reminds me of a conversation on the On Being podcast between Parker Palmer and Courtney Martin, where Courtney mentioned that showing up as a whole human is the greatest act of rebellion that we can make.
Yeah, and I think Parker Palmer always also says that to go against the familiar, or to go against, I think it was talking about teachers in academic culture, but to go against what is seen as normal, or to go against orthodoxy, is an incredibly radical act, and takes so much courage and grace. And I suppose our invitation as stewards of culture and consciousness is to be the gracious one, host that conversation, to build our inner resources so that we have the courage to ask those questions, to hold whatever answer emerges. Is to be that gracious leader.
So I'd love to pick up on that theme of grace in practice, your experience of that, and how that, your experience of that, possibly how that relates to the practice of wholeness, of taking the path towards wholeness.
Grace for me, I suppose in my own practice or my own kind of becoming, grace is a real tenderness towards self, and by extension, like to live out through in though. And so by extension of grace towards self, I'll have greater capacity to hold more of others. And I suppose for me, growing up a queer man in a straight world, just over the last 10 years, just become more and more acutely aware of just very subtle ways that culture has got to me, very subtle ways that I've silenced parts of myself that I do now really see as my gifts, my strength. And in many ways, as a man, identifying as a cis man, some of those parts were my graceful parts, were the parts of me that loved beauty, that loved dancing, that loved play, that loved sensuality. And so in some senses, I othered my sense of gracefulness, in the felt sense, and I suppose internalized feeling that I needed to be strong, and to be strong was not so much to be graceful, it was to push on through, it was to muscle my way through. Yet all along that didn't feel quite right to me. And so, I suppose I feel very blessed that I've had social supports that have, in a way, protected my grace throughout the last number of years. And I suppose lots of my work now is really about helping us surface that grace again in all of us, that tender space, that vulnerable heart that hides away so easily, yet is so needed, to create spaces where the soul can speak, as Parker would say.
That's so beautiful. I'd love to hear a little more about your experience in facilitating groups, in helping people to come to that place of connecting back to the heart and the soul, and valuing it in a sense of acceptance.
And I think a lot of it is, like, it's wordless work for me. It has been these places that, there's a lovely book that I'm just reading but have loved so far, called Therapist as Listener by Peter Wilberg, around the idea of listening as a kind of midwifing, and listening as being the art of bearing or holding space for the pregnant silence. The silence being the place where that which is as yet unborn within us to come forth. The invisible aspects of us that maybe don't have words, but have sounds, that have movements, that have an essence that can't be distilled into words. Coming back into contact with that place and bearing that place. So whether that means sitting in circle and one person's in that space where something is coming up that is wordless, but is maybe overwhelming or overpowering, sitting in silence for long enough until whatever it is that needs to be moved through them as maybe a line of release, or some kind of catharsis. It's, for me, that silence is what's helped me bear more of myself. As soon as someone kind of prematurely puts words on my experience, again, I am told, or that part of me is told, that it's maybe not able to hold itself, or it's not okay, and that I don't have the opportunity to build the capacity and the inner resourcing to bear that part of myself. And so silence for me is incredibly important. In listening one-on-one, in group work, building capacity for silence and for bearing with another. Which, yeah, for me is really, when I speak about restoring wholeness in self and society, reweaving culture, like a culture, in my perspective, is a series of interactions. And it's the quality of those interactions that constantly repattern our culture. And so what quality of interaction would we like to have? And our ability to listen, to bear with an I really hope for, to be able to sit with another and to just be able to sit with, such a beautiful thing. And so much happens. Silence is incredibly loud.
It is. And that sounds like it might be one of the ways in your upcoming book, Becoming Ourselves, that could help to describe how we navigate through, I believe you explore some of the personal and social entanglements that we're facing at this time.
Yeah.
And would love you to explore some others too.
Yeah. So silence and a real deep listening is definitely one. Listening beyond just kind of active listening or listening for tone and body language, but it's a real kind of listening as midwifing, which again welcomes that invisible aspect of self into our lives. And again, self being a relational event, not an individuated personhood. And so listening is definitely one. So in the book, I really explore restoring wholeness in self and society. And self is really about reorienting to this sense of wholeness, or this sense of welcoming in maybe the invisible aspects of ourself into our lived lives. And that is done through play. It's done through presence. It's done through reconciling our relationship to paradox, to really having range, living in the center of our pattern in our dependency, and also being able to exist on the edge of our pattern in our complete independency. The fact that we are also individuated, embodied beings in the world, we are also embedded and deeply dependent in the world. And so how do we gracefully navigate that without it being a wild swing between ourselves and others? And so that's really the exploration of restoring wholeness in self. A lot of it is around, this idea of the kind of Cartesian split between mind and body, or mind and world, and seeing them as kind of individuated events. The world happens to us, or we experience the idea of, life doesn't happen. No, you don't see the world, you see yourself in the world. And it's both. Our sense of self is created in an environment. And so it's not that we create a self and then we put that to the world. We create a self in a world and then put it back to the world. There's an ongoing reciprocity between self and world. And it's deeply humbling and very vulnerable. To be touched by the world is incredibly vulnerable. But at the same time, maybe that vulnerability helps us access connection to this ineffable part of ourselves that I'm talking about. And so it's the idea of, a mentor once said, how do you keep seeds? And you don't keep seeds by putting them in a plastic bag or packet. You keep seeds by planting them into the earth, putting them back into the earth. As soon as we strip something of its ability to change, we also strip it of its vitality. And so for ourselves, it's like there's a real safety. I think someone mentioned in the chat earlier, living with uncertainty, which is very, alive for all of us at this time. But the desire to grasp, to lock it in, to put ourselves in a kind of plastic bag to keep ourselves for later. Wholeness is also about rooting ourselves back into the earth, is about living in connection with the greater tidal forces of our life, which is deeply vulnerable and also incredibly, incredibly powerful. That may have been complete ramble,
I don't think
Good
so.
ramble? Great.
I think it was a good ramble. I kind of feel like that's a great place to actually open up for some discussion. I have more questions, but instead of hogging the floor, I think it's time to throw to the group, and I'm sure there's some great questions coming up for people, and I'll save mine for a break between.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone, feel free to unmute yourself, and Benny, if you're kind of curating any of those questions as well, I'll be happy to hear.
Yeah, I think I can see in the eyes and the faces, and thank you so much, Al. It's a blessing that you found us and that we've been privileged to your words and your thoughts. And I've got some questions too, but if anyone's got a burning one and they want to unmute, and actually we trialed it the other week that all of us were just off. We were just unmuted. So it was really nice because I think then you can hear other reactions. So if you feel like you want to unmute, you can, and just sit there. But if you have a question, throw it in.
I'm going to test that. Does it work?
You're on, Tilly.
Yay! I was just testing. Just testing. I don't have a question yet.
Your question ready.
That's it. I'm onto it. Way!
I wrote about uncertainty and the beauty of it before, but yeah, I'm not a question, but it just occurred to me that for me the uncertainty that I'm finding beautiful and like uncomfortably beautiful at this time is less about uncertain times and more about me in those times. So yeah, just finding me, learning about me now, learning about me before, learning about me to be. Yeah, it's all uncertain, let alone what's going on outside.
Yeah. Would you say this time has been some sort of mirror to all those questions for you? In some sense, the questions may have already been there, but this time's really... Yeah, same. I don't think any of us are immune to that. I've also got, and maybe I'll share one at the end, but I've got a couple of just pieces of poetry that, that I felt were resonant. Poetry for me points to, I mean, anything that is connected to the muse, any kind of art or creativity is, it's a great way to connect to this kind of hidden wholeness. It helps us overhear ourselves in a new way.
I've got a question around, and I love the way you articulated silence. Do you have any silence practices that you love? And I'm also really intrigued by the beyond active listening, because that's as far as I've got so far.
Yeah. I suppose, for some, active listening, I mean, it's just full stop after active, like listen actively. Some facilitators cue. The next iteration is kind of actually giving people cues to listen for. So listen for resonance or Me Too moments. Listen for aha moments when you see someone's body light up. The body speaks, usually louder than the words. Listen for curiosities. When people say something and your interest sparks and you're like, oh, I want to hear more. So you can also offer cues for active listening. But this kind of listening that I'm touching into, it really stems from the, I suppose, existential knowing that we are all having our individual experience of a collective event, or of a collective. We're all kind of tapping into a collective pool of emotions. We all have a felt sense of what depression feels like in our own way. We all have a felt sense of what sadness, of grief, of loneliness, of longing, of unrequited love. We all have our own kind of felt sense in our body, which is connected to the more than flesh body, of what these experiences feel like. And so when listening to somebody share, to connect to our, what in Peter Wilberg's work he calls our deep being, which is the navel, the deep place within us, which is actually connected to that common pool of human experience. So it's connecting to our experience of what the other is pointing to. So it kind of invites us to connect to beyond their words. Listen to the words, yes, but their words are only attempts to point to something that's wordless. And it's a deep recognition that that's really what's trying to be communicated through that person's body. They're trying to invite someone into that part of themselves that feels so lonely because it actually can't have words. And when we as listeners also allow ourselves to feel that, there is a knowing beyond words. And in that place, we help them bear the wordless as well. Our nervous system, there's an intersubjectivity where we both land in the wordless together. And there's a deep, deep solace there.
Do you if no one else is going to, do you think poetry is the closest thing we've got to ineffability?
For me, poetry is like church, but also music, East Forest, or any artist who, for them, their music or their art is their own therapy, will usually welcome you into that space. And I mean, for thousands of years, ancient cultures have used music and sound and rhythm and symphony and resonance as a way to welcome in those parts of ourselves, the invisible. So I think any kind of creative, expressive form or medium, and I think it's a real value for each of us to find which medium does suit us, helps us connect to that place.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. Al, I had a question which I'll throw into the mix now. And we talked earlier around the ideas of philosophically looking at the paradoxes and social entanglements that we're facing, also looking at it from a mystical point of view and scientific point of view. And we had a short conversation around the scientific approach around this, and wondered if we can move into that space and ask your perspective on the scientific side.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I think as I spoke of in our phone call, I also look at the scientific through the perspective of relational practices. So a lot of my work with leadership teams is really based around mindfulness-based emotional intelligence within leadership. And of course, we're all leaders. And so it's just mindfulness-based emotional intelligence or relational intelligence in all of our relationships. And there is increasing science around, I suppose, the role of emotions in decision-making. And also, I suppose, I'm just thinking about which register to go down, but in terms of intersubjectivity and I suppose relating it to what we were saying about listening, the I suppose modern neuroscience around mirror neurons, and that there is a part of ourselves that, and our nervous systems, through our ventral vagal nervous system. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of polyvagal theory, but Stephen Porges. It has a lot to do with trauma as well, but it has a lot to do with our social engagement system. And our nervous system is constantly in, again, reciprocity with those around us to get a grasp or a grip on our, I suppose, social and relational sphere in order to feel a sense of safety. And so it's pre-verbal, it's precognitive, it's our body naturally as social creatures is through mirror neurons and through the ventral vagal and polyvagal system, getting basically a read on our environment. And yeah, I mean, it has large implications on trauma as well. When our polyvagal system starts to shut down, our sense of possibility in the world also shuts down. So our kind of horizon of possibility shortens. And we literally don't feel certain possibilities of our human living become, to us, sensed as impossible, because our body's interface with the world has become less acute or less alive. And so I suppose that's some of the science. But for me, yeah, I'm really interested, and there's a lot of neuroscience that's now starting to prove that, yeah, the self is not this differentiated, individuated, private event only. 2/3 of our brain and our neurology is developed out of the womb. And so we are, in large part, an assemblage of our relationships, not only with other humans, but the lived world.
Thank you so much for that. There's actually so much that I would love to just dive into in what you just said. There's almost too many threads for me to figure out which one to start with. But I feel like, and one of them was that we're all leaders, and I would love to explore that if we have time. But
yeah,
I'd like to start with the trauma and shutting off that we do, and the collective trauma that we're going through right now, and grief that we're feeling for the world, for the lives and normalcy that we don't have anymore, for all of the things that everyone's experiencing this on a collective level, which is affecting our sense of wholeness and how much we're shutting off in an emotional capacity. So can you talk a little more around your perspective on what that means in terms of our wholeness, sense of wholeness, and finding that?
Yeah. So for me, it was a very alive reflection in the first wave of lockdown. Noticing myself, I have a tendency to swing towards hope. And I think many of us do, instead of heartbreak, in the hope that we can sidestep the heartbreak and just get straight to the hope. And I'm very good at silver lining my own experiences. And I mean, a lot of my work is also about constructing narratives that are hopeful. And so I do it for work, and I'm very good at doing it for myself, which is sometimes not useful to just constantly silver line and have almost a sense of wishful thinking. And so in the first lockdown, I went straight into the story that this is just we're being gifted an involuntary Vipassana retreat, and it's a cocoon for our like spiritual awakening as a society, and blah, blah, blah. And I was designing a talk for a client, actually, which was all about hope, heartbreak, and navigating paradox. And which is why I love doing this work, in designing that talk, I obviously had to sit with these questions myself. It's like, shit, I really prized hope over heartbreak. Yeah, I love Margaret Wheatley's work, and she speaks a lot about going beyond hope and heartbreak alone. And I mean, Rumi talks about it, I think, in The Field Beyond. I think it's about going to the field beyond hope and heartbreak. And it's kind of, I suppose, related to the idea of the stick that I was talking about. If hope and heartbreak are on the other side of the stick, what does it mean to actually identify that they're actually the same stick? And how can I embrace it all? And so I think a reflection for me during this whole time has been just noticing my tendency to swing towards hope constantly, not disregarding that. It's just as useful, but by itself, it can lead to very shadowy tendencies. It means that also I don't have the ability to connect deeply to the heartbreak of another. And so if I am going to practice that kind of listening that we were talking to, then it requires me to be willing to go to those places. And so for me, it's been a real time of noticing my silver lining tendency and thanking it, being grateful for it. It's a beautiful gift. And at the same time, taking the time to really allow myself to be humbled by the heartbreak. And it's just, for me, which is what I love about this path, is there is no right way. Wholeness is not an answer. For me, it's a matter of attunement honoring, and discernment. How attuned can I be to my relationship to paradox, to the dualisms? Am I in hope or heartbreak? Honoring, can I honor where I am and have that be okay and enough? And discernment, being my own puppeteer, my own magician, can I then welcome the opposite?
Thank you so much for this beautiful chat, Al, and apologies for jumping in and out a little bit. I'm loving all of the things that you're saying, and it's a pleasure to finally meet you. I love that you've mentioned Margaret Wheatley's work, and we definitely draw a lot on her stuff around how do you create these islands of sanity and compassion in these crazy times. And I guess my question for you, I'm trying to let it organically come through me, but the first part is, how do we simultaneously hold hope and heartbreak potentially, and weaving that into the thing that I loved? You said a lot of things that I loved, but I loved talking about getting the seed out of the packet. And I think it's, today is a new moon. We're about to be in like the spring equinox on Monday, I believe, and it is that time for planting those seeds. And so, when you plant a seed in the soil, and we talk a lot about seeds in soil, as I'm sure that there becomes this point, especially in spring, where this blossom that's like waiting to like burst out into this new form of wholeness, which I'm curious, is there lessons in that, do you think, around holding hope and rage at the same time? Because there's the loss of the old and the blossoming of the new. And hopefully that's an articulate enough question for you, because I feel like I'm not quite getting to the point, but I'm just going to throw it back over to you with those.
Yeah, I'll dance with that. I love the, all I can speak of from is my experience, of course. And I'm still really sitting with that question of how can I, and even sometimes can I, sit with both at the same time? At the moment, just going through a breakup after 5 years, and it's been incredibly, just last week was incredibly, we decided to part ways about 3 months ago, but last week was my first week off since February. No client work or anything, and of course everything flooded in. My soul was like, "Oh, now that I've got your attention, have a look at this, and then also have a look at this." And it was incredibly, I let myself really go there. And there was still a part of me that was like, if I let myself go here, I know there will be a kind of hope on the other side. So I'm going to go here. But going here was still because I knew there was a hope on the other side. I suppose I'm still sitting with that very question. And I suppose your second part of the question around, was it around there being a point at which, kind of the third entity emerges, between hope and heartbreak, there being a burst. I feel like I read something about this just this morning. I'm trying to remember where. But I do sense that, and I suppose to talk of David White again, but the idea of the frontier moment, the frontier between the opposite opposites, and the frontier being that melting point of opposites, where opposites, again, actually melt into something that is beyond themselves. It's a kind of, it's an alchemy, it's a transformation. And like most kinds of alchemy, it requires a kind of heat, a kind of turmoil. So I feel like there are, and for me, that happens though when it requires so much unknowing, where I literally can't, I'm not familiar with what's on the other side of that horizon. So I can't know. I can journal about it. I can tell friends that I'm trying this new practice. I can speak about it so often that I trick myself into thinking I'm inhabiting it. I can do all of these kind of things, but it is something that's so unfamiliar because it's not yet been experienced, that it does require this grand leap across the chasm of complete not knowing, until we land in a kind of, a state of being that feels so unfamiliar but right. Would be how I'd describe it, is that there is that kind of courageous leap that needs to be taken for that bursting, because we can speak, and I see this a lot in kind of men's work groups. We're speaking different words, but with the same voice. And what does it mean to really be changed? To not, move our emotions, to let our emotions move us, to be humbled by what we don't know. And I think, that's what I would relate to your question, I suppose. Lovely, juicy.
So juicy. I know Eve had a question to jump in, or just a beautiful statement also.
I'll go into what I said in the chat. First, I just wanted to say something else. Thank you, Al, for being here. What you're saying is just incredible. I'm so honoured to be co-creating a vision for a new reality with every single one of you. Like, this opportunity is just incredible to be here with you. I believe that humanity is at a crossroad, like a literal tipping point. If we are to transform, if we are to step off the path to our own destruction, we are going to have to consent to letting go of all that we have created thus far. We are going to have to step off the shore that we have called home and push forward for a new journey to a new future that we would call home. We can let go of our consumptive and destructive past and co-create with the intelligence of nature for a new reality. It is going to start with each of us making simple decisions. What stuff are you going to let go of today? What beliefs are you going to let go of today? What beauty are you going to discover today? What person will you meet and hug today for the first time? And Benny just asked me to say this, that I posted in the chat about resonating with Angie's the beauty of uncertain times. I just put, the beauty of uncertain times is also the beauty of finding yourself and where you exist in the world in these uncertain times. And knowing that when you get through those uncertain times, self-discovery and the beauty of getting to know yourself and celebrating your resilience and you and your place on this earth.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Was that piece that you were reading earlier something that you wrote just in reflection as well?
Yes, in reflection.
Yeah. Lovely. Could be a beautiful blurb for a book.
Thanks, Eve. That was really beautiful.
Eve, that sounded like a really familiar poem, like it could have been written by Mary Oliver or David White. And so I'm really glad that you asked that Al, because it in my DNA, it felt like I'd heard it before. So I don't really know what to say other than that. And thank you, and to keep writing, because that is definitely part of your essence.
Thanks.
It absolutely is. And just noticing that time's getting away from us a little bit. And Al wanted to make space for you with any closing thoughts and the potential for poetry, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Like to.
I had two pieces. One is from Margaret Wheatley, and one is from John O'Donohue, To Bless the Space Between Us. I'm not sure if anyone's read John O'Donohue. Another beautiful Celtic faith-based poet, great friends with David White. So which one? Yeah.
Just so you know, Al, we'll hang out for another 15 minutes. So if you do one, then we can have a little bit more time. If you want to do both, because I'm sure we'd love to hear.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do this one, which is, I suppose, just a great invitation for all of us again as leaders. And so feel free to close your eyes and let it be a kind of prayer down towards yourself, and to those we share our leadership with. May the gift of leadership awaken in you as a vocation, keep you mindful of the providence that calls you to serve. As high over the mountains the eagle spreads its wings, may your perspective be larger than the view from the foothills. When the way is flat and dull in times of grey endurance, may your imagination continue to evoke horizons. When thirst burns in times of drought, may you be blessed to find the wells. May you have the wisdom to read time clearly and know when the seed of change will flourish. In your heart, may there be a sanctuary for the stillness where clarity is born. May your work be infused with passion and creativity and have the wisdom to balance compassion and challenge. May your soul find the graciousness to rise above the fester of small mediocrities. May your power never become a shell wherein your heart would silently atrophy. May you welcome your own vulnerability as the ground where healing and truth join. And may your integrity of soul be your first ideal, the source that will guide and bless your work. Thank you, John.
That was a really profound poem. Thanks for sharing that, Al.
Yeah, I suppose for me, I'm curious how that lands for everyone else as well. But for me, it really speaks to that. Leadership is being someone tethered to that source, someone tethered to the muse, to creation, to the forces that animate and actually make us possible. And being a humble hose for that water to flow through. And the vulnerability and tenderness required to do so. Yeah, I suppose as a way of closing, I'm curious to hear whether it's evoked from that piece of poetry or whether it's just from our conversation. But yeah, what's really still echoing for everybody, I suppose I'm curious to hear if anyone would feel to share.
Thanks so much for the question. So we've just gone past 6, and thanks for making some extra time. Perhaps we make an extra 10 minutes or so till 6:15 together. Is everyone okay with that? Great.
All I was going to say was I just wanted to shout like amen at the end of that poem, but I'm trying to work out what other word or other phrase you can chuck in there that doesn't have a religious connotation to it and kind of completes it, sort of thing. Like,
could just do a twinkle.
So big. I don't know, collective breath. But no, it's just, that was really, really well read out, well written. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Of course.
I really like the notion, and I reckon I'll grab hold of that tightly, of your heart being a sanctuary. Yeah, that's a good idea. Good old-fashioned idea. I've got a question if nobody else wants to respond to that beautiful poem first.
Any other thoughts before we move on?
I have one, just quick, hopefully quickly, we'll see what comes out. But the first word that came up for me was invitation. And then the second, which I think is beautiful, I think we don't have many invitations in COVID and in general. And there's this real lack. The part of the lack of our wholeness is this kind of narrative of belonging. And so that's why I use that word. And the second word is a word that was shared with me with one of my collaborators. She was brought up in South African. This is a Zulu word, and made me think of what you've done this whole session and throughout this poem. And the word is Sabona, and it means I see you, you're important to me, and I value you.
Mm.
How do you spell that, Sabona?
I'll pop it in the chat because I'm dyslexic, so so Sabona.
I like it.
Mm.
Can you hear me? I'm calling from a big noisy place. Thank you all for sharing your wonderful moment with us today. It was really pleasant and nice, and just feeling so whole for the whole time. And when I was listening and also hearing your poem, the poem, it reminded me of the words my good friend Benny here once told me. Gold is in a double hold. Do you remember, Benny? So this is the term for the surfing, from the surfing, and when you dive in, this is when you feel something and you hold, but you do the second hold to feel even more. That's how I understood for the breathing. I also appreciate what you said about the silence, because I also tend to look inner self, but open up all the senses for the moment of reflection when something present happened, as well as the sad things happen. So this whole hour for me was a very present moment that I feel joy, and I want to take it all in again for the second double hold and breathe out for the better words. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Takako. That was wonderful.
And yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, Seb, in the spirit of threads and narrative and space between Takako's holding our Thursday gardening session next week, so you're wholeheartedly invited as well, Al. And I think there's a rich tapestry between these workshops and the people that are presenting and coming into our space, and yeah, it's really beautiful, and I'm loving the emergence. So thank you.
Next Thursday, did you say?
Same time, same place.
Cool.
And would you like to ask your question?
So yeah, what you said, Al, about you know, the silence or the space, and then, you know, when you stop, like you did last week or this week, and your soul, you know, your knowing self said, okay, how about this? And time to look at this and all the rest of it. And yeah, I very much so had that experience. That's like, if I could sum up 2020, it would be almost that. But at the same time, so I mean, that's very much so about sort of me and you know, how I'm walking. But very much so going on from the beautiful and imperative, or the beautiful imperative that Eve, you know, put to us, which we, you know, all are on board with. That's how we've come to be here. is around change. So at the same time as I'm dancing with, you know, my time here on this crazy spinning planet, I'm also like needing to participate in some institutions that are, you know, so obviously flawed and so obviously misaligned with the purpose that we're needing to shoot towards. But you know, like I need to perhaps be dancing in these spaces still, if they'll have me, because I'm rebellious, it would seem. Definitely. What can you just share, because I need some like hope on this front. I'm a teacher, and yeah, I'm a teacher that doesn't sit well with education, and education doesn't love me in lots of ways. So I need a bit of hope to see myself earning and thriving and giving in that space. And I'm just wondering if you can share with us the most surprising turnabout or change or moment that you've had with a conservative institution or individual executive within that, that you've had or that you're aware of, where maybe paradoxically still, you know, not shifting everything, but they've just had a moment where it's like, oh shit, GDP ain't everything, and or, you know, like, can you just give us anything on that?
Yeah. Love the question, and love the...
Sorry, it's long.
That was great. I love the questions close in, like not the big, super audacious questions, but for me, the most courageous questions are almost the ones that are so close in and relevant to me and my inquiry. Yeah, and so I love the question. For me, in my experience, as soon as I can, if I am, say, in a coaching scenario with an executive, as soon as I can, which is maybe the third session, I will talk about their family. Partly because I know to have leverage in a coaching relationship, I need to work with their highest value point. And for a lot of executives and a lot of people I work with, which is challenging for me, it brings up a lot of daddy issues, male, pale, and stale older white men. And that value point, what they really care about is not really their work. It's when they get home and they sit around the dining table with their children. They're the relationships that they really care about. And sadly, they're often also the relationships that are deprived. And as soon as I can talk about those relationships, I know that the work begins. Because, you know, relationships, whether it's the workplace or whether it's our private lives, we're running the same relational patterns. And so if I can change the way that one relates at home, and that's what I try to do because that's where the highest value is, that's where I have leverage, then that will start to flow into the workplace. And so as soon as I can, I work my way into their home relationships. And they're surprised as to, oh, I'm not sure if I was meant to share that. No, everything is welcome here. I invited that. And there's a real softness in them. It's like I see their man for the first time. I see their gentle man, the humble man for the first time. And things slowly start to shift. So for me, it's really, finding that leverage point, which oftentimes is the most personal relationships at home. For those who maybe their organization and the work isn't so virtue guided just yet, they're there because they want to be a great father, a great husband, a great partner, lover, whatever. But it's those intimate relationships. And so I try to talk about that. And from there I see great ripples. It's a natural I suppose even regardless of how we're able to maybe improve their relationship with, say, their son at home or their lover, it's for them the felt recognition that, oh yeah, that's my why. Like, your why doesn't have to be that your organization is creating X-fold impact in the world. It's okay for your why to be a fucking great dad. That's actually really noble. Connect with it, have that animate your work, see how that shows up. And so just connecting with what their actual why is, as humble as it needs to be, will also have grand residual impact.
Can I just very quickly ask then, is that how you'd approach ScoMo? Like whether coaching or just approaching, like, would you just go, how's your family? Maybe like that seemed aggressive. Maybe just like, how's things going at home, mate? I don't know.
I'd say, yeah, but after a few sessions, yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd also, like, Gestalt psychotherapy is very much in the here and now. And so knowing, and it's very psychodynamic as well, using transference, not really going too much into the past about how things were. It's really right now, how are you feeling in our relationality? In the space between us, how are you feeling? And I'm curious, how is this maybe mirroring other relationships for you? So how can our work here now in our relationship model how you might show up in other relationships? So even if it's not talking about their intimate family, it's working here and now in our therapeutic alliance. Because often, relationships are patterned and we hold the pattern.
That is such an absolutely beautiful place to end the session, with that invitation and that closing thought. Al, thank you so much for joining us. It's been beautiful to have you and to dialogue with you and to share this space.
Thank you all. It's been, incredibly regenerative. I just love, as I said, intimate groups, highly charged, alive, invested, beautiful souls. So thank you all for sharing in dialogue and letting it be just that. Nothing more uncomfortable for me than feeling like I need to be the one that shares all the things. So
yeah.
So
just to close out, is everyone okay to take one whole breath together? Just sink into where you are in your chair or on your feet, and invite you to close your eyes and take a deep breath in with me through the belly and the chest, all the way up, and hold. Just for a couple of moments, feeling that space inside and out. And when you're ready, open your eyes and send some of that gratitude and love and whatever spirit you're here today in, through your eyes into this space as we say goodbye.